In 3, 2, 1. This is Acting Mastery. I'm Ben Matthews.
In this episode, we have the extraordinary honour of speaking with one of the most influential figures in the Australian theatre, John Bell. When it comes to Shakespeare, John Bell is perhaps Australia's most authoritative voice. He's not only an acclaimed actor and director, but the founder of the Bell Shakespeare Company, which has brought the works of William Shakespeare to life for audiences across Australia for over 3 decades. He's been awarded an Officer of the Order of Australia and an Officer of the Order of the British Empire for his outstanding contributions to the arts. John was involved in the early days of 2 of Australia's most seminal theatre companies, the Old Tote Theatre Company, which eventually evolved into what we now know as the Sydney Theatre Company, and then the Nimrod Theatre Company, which began in what we now refer to as the Stables Theatre in King's Cross and later moved into what we now know as Belvoir St Theatre. As a young man, John studied in England and went to work at the Royal Shakespeare Company with some of the greats of the British theatre, an experience that profoundly shaped his approach to acting and directing. With a career spanning more than 60 years, John has played some of Shakespeare's most iconic roles, from Hamlet to King Lear and Richard III. He's directed countless productions that left an indelible mark on Australia's theatrical world. In this episode, we'll explore John's deep connection with Shakespeare, his insights on acting and directing, and the lessons he's learned through his long and illustrious career. We'll also hear his invaluable advice for young actors starting out today. So, without much ado, John Bell.
John Bell, welcome to Acting Mastery.
Thank you, Ben.
We are honoured to have you.
Good to be here.
You have said in previous interviews that Shakespeare made you a humanist. Can you explain what that means?
Well, a humanist, basically, to describe it roughly, is somebody who doesn't believe there's any sort of supernatural entity, like no God figure or creator figure, but that we all write our own scripts, we all find our own way, we provide our own answers, and that whatever answers we find are, to do with humanity and not with any kind of supernatural presence. So it's explaining all human activity and the good things we do, the bad things we do, through studying human nature, basically.
And what was it specifically about Shakespeare that turned you into a humanist?
I think his compassion for all ranks of people, his psychological insights into what motivates people, his skepticism about people's behavior, his sense of humor, and sense of deep tragedy in human activities as well. So all of those things combined, I think, I thought, this is my secular Bible. This is my guide to life, and I can judge things and what's happening in the world and happening between others, people and me, through that particular lens.
You've spoken about how there were a couple of English teachers that had a big impact on you at an early age. Can you tell us a little bit more about what was it that they were teaching, and what drew you to this lifelong love affair with William Shakespeare?
I have to thank those 2 teachers very profoundly for that. I hadn't come across much Shakespeare until I was about 12 or 13, because it wasn't very often performed. I was in Maitland in the Hunter Valley, so there wasn't much theatre happening of any sort, let alone Shakespeare. And then in my sort of 12, 13-year-old, we had an English teacher who loved poetry. He was a poet himself. He loved all sorts of literature, and he loved Shakespeare particularly. And he was teaching us A Midsummer Night's Dream. That was the first play I'd ever come across. And instead of passing the book around the class and saying, each one read a sentence and then pass it on, which I think is the deadliest way to teach Shakespeare, turn you right off for life, he acted all the parts. He did all the roles. He was a frustrated actor himself. Right. He was a great big man. He was the football coach as well as the English teacher, had a big booming voice, great sense of humour, and he would walk up and down the aisles acting all the characters. Bottom, of course, was his favourite role. He gave that all his attention. And he had us in fits of laughter and marveling at his performance and at this play that he brought to life. He was a very good bottom. He wasn't so hot as Titania, Queen of the Fairies, but he did his best. And we couldn't wait for the next English lesson to see what happened next and to hear him perform it for us.
Right.
And as well as performing it, he described the lighting, the sets, the pratfalls, the business, etc., that he'd seen himself in theatre. He remembered all that stuff and taught us. So that was a fantastic introduction to Shakespeare.
Yeah.
And then just maybe 6 months later or so, he took us off to the movies to see Laurence Olivier's Henry V.
Wow.
And that was the first Shakespeare I'd seen on the screen. And I was totally blown away because, it's an old movie now, but it's still well worth watching.
Yeah.
The colour, the spectacle, the action, the Elizabethan nature of the theatre, and of course Olivier at his greatest, most histrionic. And I just was amazed. I thought I'd never heard anybody speak like that. I didn't know that language could be so exciting. And so we came out of the movie, and all the other kids got on the bus and went home, and I just turned around and went back inside, and I watched it all over again. And I thought, that's it. I'm going to be an actor. I'm going to do Shakespeare for the rest of my life. That was my decision then at the age of 15. And I never changed my mind.
Clearly.
So I have to thank him for that experience too, because that was a marvellous introduction to Shakespeare in performance. And then, of course, we went and saw the other Olivier movies, Richard III, Hamlet. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I was really committed to being an actor. And then he was moved on to another school. They swapped the teachers around regularly. And then I had another English teacher in my final year who was also a great Shakespeare aficionado and loved performing. He loved Shakespeare and theatre. And he said to me, you want to be an actor? I said, that's what I want to be. He said, okay, we'll do a play night from the school. And my school had never done a play night in history, unheard of.
Wow.
It was all about football and cricket and maths. That's what education was. So he said, you can choose whatever parts you want to do, and you can direct it all and design it, and I'll hire all the costumes from Sydney. So I said, okay. I said, let's do Oedipus Rex, because this is when I was 17, because I knew that Olivia had played Oedipus Rex. And I said, I want to do a scene from Henry IV playing Hotspur, because that's what we were studying in class, and I loved that role. It was so amusing and histrionic. And I said, and we'll run a pantomime, with me as the chief clown, and all the other kids can be the acrobats and, whatever. So we put on this show for 2 glorious nights in the Maitland Town Hall.
Wow.
And he was as good as his word. He arranged all the costumes to come from Sydney, etc., etc. And so I did that play night. I think they've never done one since. It's probably scared the pants off me. And then I had to finish my high school, the leaving certificate as it was then. And I passed, but it wasn't it was an okay pass. And he said, no, I want you to repeat your final year, do it again, and go for a much better result. He said, you're going to do English honours, modern history honours, ancient history honours, and I'll coach you in all 3 of them.
Wow.
And then you're going to get a good degree, go to university, graduate, and then you're going to be an actor. That's it. Okay? My future was all written out for me. And so he did. He, 3 days a week he'd come in and coach me in all those subjects. And I sat the leaving again, and I passed with all those subjects. I got a Commonwealth scholarship to go to university. And that's when it all started. And I've often regretted that I never thanked him enough for that extraordinary gesture. Or my other English teachers as well. You think, they're there to teach me, that's their job. You don't realise what they're giving up and how much they're putting into giving you those opportunities. So I never really had the chance to say a really proper thank you. I didn't realise until years later what he had actually done for me.
Right. Such a profound impact.
Truly, truly profound. And so I went to university, and I did 4 years English honours, but I was acting most of the time rather than studying, of course, as all students do.
And you were famously part of the Sydney University Dramatic Society in what was a very kind of seminal part of SUD's history.
Yeah. Well, I was actually with the competition. I was with the Sydney University Players.
Oh, forgive me.
That's right. It's okay. I don't know if they still exist.
Right.
But there were about 5 competing drama companies on campus.
Wow.
The St Paul's Mummers, the St John's Acting Theatre Troupe, the they all had their actual acting trips. There was so much theatre on campus. And of course, Suds was the established one, and then along came players to rival them and compete.
See.
And that competition really got us all excited and up to at our best.
Wow. What did you learn from that period of university theatre?
Well, I learned that I was the greatest thing on earth, that I was God's gift. We all thought we were, everybody. Yep. And some of them were, people like Clive James and Bob Hughes and Jermaine Greer, Des Murray, they were all God's gift.
Wow.
But we all thought we were,
Right.
It gives us that confidence, if you like, that arrogance to say, I'm going to go out there and conquer the world.
Yeah.
And we didn't have any severe criticism from the press or anything, so we just got away with murder. Mm-hmm. And I'm really grateful for that opportunity just to make all those mistakes, all that energy going into creating something that stood me in good stead for later.
Yeah, because I think something that I didn't know about you until I was reading your book was that you'd actually auditioned for NIDA and then decided not to go, or at least Mum suggested you.
That was my mum, and that teacher that I mentioned.
Right.
He said to her, "No, John's not going to go to NIDA. He's going to go to university."
Wow.
Yeah, teacher said, "That's what you do, and that's what you're going to do."
There you go.
And I was a bit cross for a moment, but once I got to university and joined that throng, I was very grateful.
Yeah.
Because I think at that age, and coming from the bush, I would have been eaten up at NIDA.
Yeah.
And spat out again.
Yeah.
I don't think I would have survived the psychological warfare that went on there,
Yeah. And it seems like the great thing about university theatre is it provides young people with an opportunity to really experiment and find their voice.
Yeah. We all took enormous risks and did outrageous things, put on huge spectacles and stuff. And it was all enjoyable. There was no real threat, there's no anxiety attached to it. We were just all having a ball.
Something that really struck me about your career is how often you have not waited for the phone to ring. Mm-hmm. You haven't waited for your agent to give you a call, but you've actually gone out there and created your own opportunities in many at many different stages of your life. And one stage was when you were, I think, 22 or 23, you put on a one-man show.
I did.
You want to tell us about that?
Oh, talking about arrogance and self-belief. That was when I left university. So I would have been 18, 19, 20, 21.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. And I thought, well, I've got to announce my arrival in the world. So I hired the Genesian Theatre, which is now gone. I think it was in Kent Street.
I think it's actually still there.
It's still there. Oh, great. I'm glad to hear that. And I put on a one-man Shakespeare show. They all helped me. They were all sort of friends, and they all, supported me and gave me the theatre for nothing and helped me find costumes and stuff. I did a one-man show called, I think, This Sceptred Isle, which is a quote from Richard II. And I just told the history of all the English kings, from Richard II, Henry IV, Henry V, Henry VI, Richard III, Henry VIII, taking speeches from all the plays. And I'd run around putting on different hats, different crowns, different cloaks, blah, 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 and doing all these speeches. And, I've no idea what it was like from out front, but it attracted the notice of critics. And when I went to audition for the Old Tote Theatre Company, which was just beginning, they'd heard about me. And so I got a good audition, and I was accepted into that first year of the Old Tote Theatre Company. So that was a lucky break. I've been very lucky with timing, I must say, throughout my career.
So Old Tote invited you to join their company. What was that period like? How long were you with the Old Tote?
Not very long. I joined them for that first season, and I was offered the part of Trophimoff in the Cherry Orchard, which I loved, and then Ice and Ring in the Fire Raisers. And then while we were in rehearsal, Tom Brown, who was one of the heads of acting, said, "Are you any good at fencing?" And I said, "Oh, yeah, sure, I'm brilliant. I've never done any fencing at all." And he said, "Okay, do you want to play Hamlet?" And I just really fell over. I thought, what? Never had occurred to me. But of course I grabbed it and really worked hard on it. And that was another wonderful lucky break. So I played Hamlet, and then the following year they did Henry V. This was the Elizabethan Theatre Trust as part of the Adelaide Festival. And that was in the circus tent in Adelaide Park, and then they brought it to Sydney to Rushcutters Bay. And that was my second big, blessing.
Mm.
But the other blessing was that I met my future wife in
Yes.
that first season of The Cherry Orchard. Anna Volska was playing a junior role in that, and she played Catherine, the princess in Henry V. And so that was the start of a 60-something year marriage.
Wow.
Still going.
Wow.
And here's the lucky break thing, you see, the opportunities I've had. And I know many actors don't get these breaks, so I'm not boasting about them, I'm just very grateful for them. After Henry V, I was approached by a lady from the British Council who said, we've got some money left in the kitty and we've got to spend it by the end of the year. Do you want to go to England? Sure. Do I what? And so I applied to the Bristol Old Vic School and they accepted me. So, but before the end of the year, I was off to England to the Bristol Old Vic.
And what was that experience like? What did you learn at the Bristol Old Vic? It seems like it was a pretty extraordinary period that kind of marked a transition between the sort of the old way of doing things, the old way of performing Shakespeare, and this kind of new wave of thinkers and directors that were beginning to make a name for themselves in the UK.
Yeah,
while you were there.
that was happening, but it wasn't. That wasn't the doing at the Bristol Old Vic.
Okay, they weren't.
No, it was a very conservative, old-fashioned school. Lovely teachers, lovely people, and about, I suppose, 50 students. And we did the usual animal improvisations and the voice classes, the singing classes, and all that stuff, which was all great fun. But I'm lucky I got that opportunity to go to the Royal Shakespeare Company.
Yeah,
because, well, I've been there for 6 months, and the head of the school, Mr. Old Vic, said to me, look, I've got this letter from the Royal Shakespeare Company. They're auditioning young actors from all around the country to make a group of 10 to join a special studio at Stratford-on-Avon. Do you want to apply? I said, sure. So I auditioned for that and got in, and that's how I joined the Royal Shakespeare. We had like 6 months of this studio experimentation, and then we were absorbed into the main company. So again, it was timing. Lucky timing.
And at the RSC, you worked with some of the legends of that era, people like Peter Hall and Peter Brook, and
Trevor Nunn,
Paul Schofield.
Paul Schofield was my very favourite actor. He was just a wonderful man and a wonderful actor. Until then, it had always been Laurence Olivier was my, and he still is a kind of a god, I suppose. And I went to see him. I used to go up from Bristol to London, whenever I could, and I saw him do some of his major roles, including Othello.
What was that like?
Well, that was the greatest stage performance I'd ever seen. It was
to
just
this
astonishing.
day?
To this day.
Wow.
It was the most knockout performance because he just he just walked on stage very quietly and seemingly without any effort, he just filled that theatre, almost with a whisper. He didn't have to do anything. In fact, I knew one of the actors in the production, and he had to run across in the second or third scene of Othello, there's a riot going on, and Othello stops the riot. And in this particular production, Olivier grabbed this guy by the throat and forced him down to his knees and down to the ground. And I said, this guy, that must be pretty hard work. When he grabs you around the throat, he said, it's very hard because he doesn't touch me. His hand's utterly relaxed. I have to do all the work and all the acting because he's saving himself, taking all the effort for his voice. He doesn't want to waste it on me.
Right.
And that's what I call technique.
Yeah.
So expert, so relaxed, physically, vocally, that you can do that and convince the audience. And that was the secret of his amazing acting, I think. And I saw him do several other roles as well, but Othello was my first time seeing him live on stage. So he was still a great idol, and I do love seeing his old movies, but Schofield was something different. He was, if you've ever seen the movie of A Man for All Seasons, well, that's what he was. He was like that. He had that kind of integrity and honesty, deeply moral person, very generous, very considerate, lovely man to work with, and an astonishing actor.
Astonishing.
And that's what was my real education. That's the first play I was in at Stratford, was Time on of Athens. Wow. And I would stand in the wings every night and just watch and listen night after night, studying his technique and his approach to acting. And that was my education, really.
What did you learn from Paul Schofield?
Wow, it's hard to sum up in a few words, but such a mastery of the voice and experimenting with the voice. He would sort of do scales and just test out which is the best sound, which is the most emotive sound you can make. He was kind of experimenting all the time. And he was very sort of, I suppose, quizzical, the way he'd examine a role and sort of take it apart. and examine every detail of it. And it was just wonderful to watch with the other actors. He was so generous and giving and offering them opportunities that, it was marvellous. There's another actor who I also much admired called Paul Rogers, and he was acting opposite Schofield. And there's one scene, the second half of the play was set in a sand pit. It's when Timon is banished and goes out, or banishes himself and goes out into the wilderness. And they made him a bit like Waiting for Godot with this desert and the sand pit. And he was in this sand pit scrabbling around looking for something to eat. And on comes Epaminondas, the cynical character, who's always been his critic and tormentor. And they played this scene together. It was a great scene. They argued and tossed ideas around. It was wonderful to watch the two of them playing together, being spiteful to each other.
Right.
And we were watching it one night, and Paul Rogers was standing behind me, waiting to go on, and Schofield got some sand down his throat, this bloody sand pit. I mean, it was pretty stupid to have to act in the sand pit. Anyway, got some sand in his throat. He started to cough, and Rogers said, "Quick, grab me a bottle of water." So one of the actors ran off and got this sort of flask full of water, and Paul Rogers carried it on, and said to Schofield, "There, take that," and threw this water in, and growled back at him and drank the water, and he was right again. But I thought that's really quick thinking on both their parts.
Wow.
How to look after another actor on stage.
Right.
I loved that. There was a lot of that going on.
Yeah.
As well as a lot of campery and mucking around. You wouldn't do it now, but back then in the 60s, actors were a little less conscientious, I'd say, including me. We did play silly tricks and sending each other up.
Right.
And got away with it. But you wouldn't now.
Not these
If I were
days.
directing it, you'd be out on your bum.
Yeah. And what about some of the other incredible people that you worked with? John Barton, who famously was the head of the Royal Shakespeare Company and did that amazing series on playing Shakespeare. What did you learn from John?
He gave me some one-on-one classes, and he was absolutely ruthless about the text and how the text should be performed, and the clues you can find in the text in terms of punctuation and construction, how to get the most out of it. He was very scientific about all of that. He was a funny character. He was kind of sort of morose in a way, and kind of sloppy. He looked like the dog's breakfast. I once saw him drop a cream bun on the floor and just scoop it up and ate it without even knowing he'd done it. He was too busy talking. Cream bun all over his beard. He was a funny sort of character in a way.
Yeah.
But very, very good, very perceptive. And his productions grew throughout the season. He did a Love's Labour's Lost. And on that first night, first week or so, it was quite sort of slogging and slow and punctilious. And then during the season, of course, it warmed up, and he'd done so much work on it, and the actors had they took it over, and it really found its own life. Yeah. So it wasn't a great opening, but all that work he put into it came to fruition. It's just a shame it didn't get there by the first night, but then most shows don't.
Yeah.
They're always better a week later.
True. So after the UK, what had you returned to Australia?
Well, by then, Anna was in the company with me, and we were living in Stratford. We had 2 little girls. And after that period there, I thought, well, this is a turning point. I'd like the girls to grow up in Australia. I was a bit sick of the low, grey winter skies. And I'd like them to have some sunshine and beaches and bush picnics, etc., etc. I'd like to go back to see my folks and, go back to my own country. And I felt the same. And I thought, well, I could either do that or stay here the rest of my life and be a little cog in this great English theatre machine along with thousands of others, or maybe go back and do something enterprising. The theatre there is not flourishing yet. It needs people to go back and, give it a bit of a boot along. So that's when I decided to come home.
And for a while, you actually taught at NIDA.
Yes. Well, I thought, okay, we'll go home. And so I wrote to the head of NIDA and John Clark. Yeah. And said, I'm coming back and I coming home. And he wrote straight back and said, do you want to be head of acting? John had directed me earlier in a play called Fire Raisers for the Old Tote. Anyway, I grabbed it. I thought, this is fantastic. So I came back and was head of acting for just over a year, I think. And I decided this is not really for me. I don't know enough yet to be
Right.
teaching. I've
Yeah.
never studied acting.
Yeah.
I had that 6 months at Bristol, and that's all I've ever studied.
Right.
The rest has all been picked up on the run. So I didn't feel equipped to be teaching classes, and I thought I'm not ready for this yet. And that's when my friend Ken Haller, the late Ken Haller, approached me and said, "I found this old garage in King's Cross. Do you want to come and start a theatre company with me?" So I told Anna, I'm going to lose my salary. I'm going to be taking a punt. I've got no money to do this, but we're going to try and create a theatre company. And so she said, let's go for it. So we did.
And that was the Nimrod.
That was the Nimrod Theatre.
Wow. Which became the precursor to Belvoir
Well,
Street.
yeah, it morphed into Belvoir.
Yeah.
We were at the Stables Theatre for 4 years, and it was too small for us. So we took over the old factory in Belvoir Street, the old tomato sauce factory, and that became the new Nimrod. We rebuilt it inside completely, and I ran that for the next 9 years with various colleagues, including Kim Carpenter, Aubrey Mellor, Ken Haller, of course. Richard Ware was there for a while too.
Yeah.
And then after, it was 14 years of running a theatre company, I thought, I've had enough of this now. It's all about meetings and board meetings and funding applications. I'm just a bit over it. So that's when I decided to leave and go freelance for a while.
Fantastic. And eventually the opportunity to start Bell Shakespeare came about. What was the impetus? Why create an Australian theatre company dedicated to Shakespeare?
Well, because I wanted to do Shakespeare. I wanted to act it and play all those parts. And there wasn't all that much Shakespeare happening. And that's when my friend Tony Gilbert, the late Tony Gilbert, who had been our accountant at Nimrod, said to me, I've got some money put aside, I'd like to promote Shakespeare in something. Should I make a foundation or a scholarship? I said, no, you should start a theatre company. He said, okay, well, there's the money. Get cracking. It wasn't enough to create a theatre company, but it allowed me to go to the Australian Elizabethan Theatre Trust and say, here's some seeding money, but you help me to raise the rest and form this new company. I wanted to be a national company touring all over Australia and just doing Shakespeare. And it seemed like a crazy idea.
Yeah.
We were in the middle of a recession at the time.
The 90s.
So it wasn't all that great an idea, but the trust said, yeah, sure, we'll support you. They gave me an office and a telephone and a secretary, and off we went. And we managed to raise enough money in that year to launch the company. And we played that first season in Sydney, Melbourne, Canberra. And then the next 7 years. Sorry?
In a tent, I read.
Well, yeah, a circus tent, that's right. We borrowed this, we hired a circus tent from Circus Oz.
Right.
And it was a kind of, it made it more exciting. A new company starting in a circus tent, touring around Australia. A very attractive idea for all sorts of people. And so that was our first season. And then for the next 7 years, we battled on without any much government funding, a little bit here and there, but no sort of proper funding. And then after 7 years, we started to get some triennial funding. And so the Bell Shakespeare Company kept going. And I was the artistic director of that for 25 years.
And look, I have to say some of my most formative experiences as a young man in the theatre were seeing Bell Shakespeare productions that either you were in or that you directed. Why do you think it was important for Australians to hear Shakespeare done with an Australian accent?
Yes, that is important. As I say, we didn't get all that much Shakespeare locally. Occasionally, Elizabethan Theatre Trust would put on a show, but they'd often bring out the star from England, and they would host productions touring from the old Vic Theatre, people like Robert Helpman and Catherine Hepburn, and those sort of actors, Vivian Leigh. But there wasn't much happening in the local scene. And I thought, well, if we keep doing Shakespeare and trying to sound English, it's kind of denying who we are. It sounds foreign, it doesn't sound like us communicating with our audience. So we have to start using our own voice. And I didn't make that a point to the other actors, but I remember one of the reviews of Hamlet, Catherine Hepburn, the publisher.
In Australia?
Yeah. Catherine Brisbane.
Oh, yes.
Oh,
Yeah,
dear.
yeah, that's okay.
My memory's going bad.
That's okay.
Catherine Brisbane wrote a review and said it was wonderful to hear Shakespeare spoken in Australian accents. And I thought, wow, that was unintentional. We just spoke as we were. We didn't think of, we're going to try and sound Australian. So, but then, of course, in some of the comedies, I pushed it quite a long way. I did A Taming of the Shrew and set that on the Gold Coast because it's supposed to be sort of a luxurious kind of place. And the characters are all pretty broad and, down to earth and very sort of mercenary. So it made it this sort of, businessmen on the Gold Coast sort of world with quite broad Australian accents. And that worked. It was very funny. It worked well. So, I just kept playing with that idea of using our own voice. In my first season, I made sure we had actors from various ethnic backgrounds, a Polish actor, a Greek actor, and so on, so that we weren't just sort of a white bread Australian look.
Yes, yeah.
That was important. But I also think that we have to try and relate the stories to our own experience. And that's quite a subtle thing to do. You don't have to sort of put everybody in, Australian costumes and in broad Australian accents or settings to make the point that it's about us. You can do it much more subtly than that. But I think you have to try to relate the stories that they're our stories and we're not imitating anybody. That had been the Australian practice up till then. I remember the late Ron Hadrick. Everyone I know is the late, which is how old I'm getting. The great late Ron Hadrick said to me, you've got two voices, one for the stage and one for the pub, and don't ever get them confused.
Yeah.
If you get to raise your voice on stage, people are going to complain. If you use your posh voice in the pub, they'll flatten you. So, just be aware of what you're doing. So that dichotomy just seems silly. You have to have one voice, your own voice, and that's what you use, whatever you're doing.
When you approach a role, do you have a process as an actor?
Look, I've been through so many different processes since I began with different directors that I've now kind of just evolved my own way of working, and I don't think of any particular process. I pick out the best bits from all of those directors and try and combine them into my own, I wouldn't even call it a method, just my own way of practice. And I always tried, when I was running Bell Shakespeare, I always tried to find directors who were so much better than I was, so I could learn something from them. So Stephen Berkoff, for instance, Michael Bogdanov, the National. We had Liviu Chilai from Czechoslovakia. Really, very, very good directors. And I learned something from all of them, something very different.
What did you learn from Berkoff?
Berkoff, aggression, I suppose. Physicality.
Right.
Real grunt. Put real grunt into it and make it very physical and take no prisoners. And that was great. And he was very punctilious and very sort of demanding physically on the choreography. It had to be absolutely, it's like being in the army, He'd be barking orders at you,
Right.
That was good. And then from Berikowski, I learned about having fun and frivolity and being outrageous and using all sorts of disparate ideas and images. From Michael Bogdanov, it was the political application and how is this relate to our political system and situation? What's this play telling us about the way wars happen and the way wars are fought? Liviu Chilai was... they'd say you walk out on stage and you throw your arms wide and you point your chin at the sky and you yell that line. I said, that's going to be ridiculous. No, just do what I told you. So I did it. I thought, Christ, this sounds wonderful. This is marvelous.
Wow.
So he released something that was too, wouldn't have thought of doing otherwise. But it was, he was someone who just pushed things to the extreme. He was so punctilious as a director. We're doing the lower depths with him. This is with the Old Tote Theatre Company. And he took 4 days to light it because the lighting was so detailed and so particular. I thought, he was like that in his directing too. Nothing was too much trouble. The finest detail in every aspect of performance. That was a great lesson. Nothing sloppy, nothing half-cooked. Get the detail right.
I read in your book you talked about that really it wasn't until you were 60 that you really figured out what acting was. And that for a long time you had kind of ascribed to I think you'd heard Grotowski give it a talk, or who was it?
Grotowski?
Yeah, who was it that you said? So you said that somebody had said to you that acting was all about truth, finding the truth, and then you began to realize, well, it's not just about truth; it's also about technique. what was it that you discovered at 60?
At 60?
Yes, well, you said that you kind of figured it out at 60, so maybe you can help us save some time and tell us what acting is about.
No. Well, look, it's about so many different things, depending on the situation, the play, the character, the director, the audience. It's not just about one thing.
Right.
Certainly telling the truth is the most important, that the audience believes you. I've just been watching a little bit of, I can't remember his name myself, forget it. But yes, that comes across on screen as well as on stage. And you believe this person is really, you don't believe it's the character, but you believe in the emotion. I mean, you can see Humphrey Bogart played 10 different parts, but he always brings to it something that's so personal. So did Jimmy Cagney. I mean, lots of actors do that, and they're the ones you really. I'm just watching at the moment an actor called
a show or a
Reeves,
Reeves.
Sutherland, Kiefer Sutherland.
Kiefer Sutherland.
You're watching Kiefer Sutherland in a program show called the Designated Survivor.
Yes. Yeah.
Have you seen any of that?
I have.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, he's fantastic. And he just brings so much to every shot, every moment that you believe in. I know it's Kiefer Sutherland, but I also believe it is the character he's portraying. That's the kind of thing I'm talking about. No matter who the actor is, you actually believe they are living this moment, you know, and you kind of know but forget that they are just an actor.
That's right.
And you admire the tremendous skill they bring to that. And I think that's what good acting is, that people know you're an actor, they know you're on stage, but they still are moved or amazed or surprised by what the character is doing. And people used to go to a great length back in the sort of 40s and 50s to change their appearance completely. Lots of makeup, lots of wigs, lots of false noses, all that sort of stuff. And they thought that was the trick to look like another person. And so it's all about the makeup. So that, you don't need all that. You know. I think that's the current belief. That might change again in the next generation. But right now I believe it's not about disguising, it's about revealing something, which is much more important. It was Grotowski who said acting is like going to confession. And he was talking as a sort of from a Polish Catholic heritage. Confession is declaring your inmost self, your most private self, sing it out in public. You know? And that's how he described it. And I think that's true. The good actors, I think, the great actors aren't, they don't hold anything back. They don't conceal. I'm thinking of Kate Blanchett, for instance, has that marvelous facility of just revealing everything. Oh, as far as we know, it's true. Judi Dench does the same. We're just touching into their own personality and conveying that without any embarrassment or holding nothing back, saying this is what this character is doing right now.
And then how do you marry that with technique? Well, how important is technique?
Well, technique is very, very important. It's vital. Otherwise, you're going to burn out or you won't get your word across to the third row. You have to train vocally and know how to place your voice, how to project. And I'm talking about stage now. Of course, film's a whole different ballgame. You've got a mic right there. But
different
also
technique for film.
But different technique, totally different. Yeah, still the same truth, still the same honesty, but it's a different. You've got to know how to use the camera and make it do what you want it to do. But also physically, you have to be able to. You can't just act, especially Shakespeare. You can't act it from the neck up. It's going to be the whole body. It has to be involved and expressive, conveying things to the audience. So I'd say just keep training physically, vocally, all your life. You never can stop learning more and experimenting more. But without technique, you're nothing, nobody.
I read in your book too that you said, I think out of your experience teaching at NIDA, that you kind of realized that in some ways acting can't be taught, that really it was more about helping actors remove blocks, emotional, psychological blocks, and then nurturing whatever talent they may have.
Yeah, I think that's largely true. You can teach people various techniques and theory, and you can sort of offer them criticism and advice, but you can't put talent in there if there's nothing there to start with. And some actors can get by without much talent at all. They're very employable. They can do what the director wants, and they don't have to be sort of playing a King Lear to get by. But if you're going to tackle the great roles, either classic or modern, like View from the Bridge or the great Death of the Salesman, those great modern roles, you have to have a particular talent to make those roles ring true. You've got to be so in touch with something internal and truthful. That's what talent is, I think.
You've directed a lot of plays. What do you look for in an actor when you're casting?
Well, it depends on the role I'm casting. That'll have I might think someone is absolutely wonderful, but not right for this role. Will disturb the balance of what they're looking for. Have to play with these other characters. So are they a good part of the team, a good balance? But I look mainly for something that excites me, that interests me, something that comes with a very polished technique, but be pretty dull. Someone else might have much technique at all, but they're telling you something truthful and they're floundering around, but they're expressing something that touches you. So you want that excitement, enthusiasm, commitment, a willingness to experiment and to dig inside themselves, a good team player, somebody good-natured enough not to cause a ruckus in the rehearsal room, being a drama queen or whatever. So you look for all those things. So you're looking at this on several different levels at the same time.
What do you feel young actors need to work on the most today? If you had any advice for this younger generation of actors that are coming up at the moment, what advice would you give them?
Well, I'd first say watch a lot of other actors work on screen or on stage, both, or television, whatever. See what it is about them that convinces you or attracts you or you find fascinating. But then don't start imitating them. That's not the way to do it. And in the old days, actors used to do that. They'd imitate each other and pass on a certain tradition, if you like. But no, it's all about seeing what excites you about their work, and then I'd say study something else besides straight acting. If you can sing, dance, whatever, any physicality or acrobatic qualities you have, explore all of them, because that makes you so much more employable. But mainly, watch good acting, look out for it, learn how to assess it, and when there are classes available, keep brushing up your technique. You mightn't find that all of them are satisfactory, but give it a go and just keep in touch with other actors and the theatre scene or the film scene, whatever it is, and just stay in the party.
What do you think Shakespeare offers the younger generation? Why should they still perform Shakespeare? Why is it something that is important for them to become good at doing? What can it offer them as an actor?
Well, it might offer them some employment opportunities. I mean, there's the Bell Shakespeare Company and the Daniel Lyons Company, Sport for Joe, which does wonderful Shakespeare work. And occasionally other state companies will put on a Shakespeare play, and there are many other. I'm surprised how many groups there are around Sydney putting on Shakespeare in the park, on the beach, up a gum tree. It's everywhere. So there are work opportunities. But also, I think, more important, it's stretching your imagination and your technique. It's challenging vocally, physically, and imaginatively. You have to really go to extremes, because all of Shakespeare's plays, whether it's a tragedy or a comedy or a history play, are about extremes of passion or courage or grief or mischief. A character like Iago, for instance, where does that hate and envy come from? You have to really explore deeply and engage with the psychology of the character. So I think Shakespeare was the greatest psychologist who ever lived. And that was said to me by a psychologist, by the way.
Wow.
So it's the understanding of human nature in big situations. And then I think as an actor, it just has to stretch you for the better.
Yeah.
And audiences still want to see it. Um, so I think at any level, to work on Shakespeare, to experiment with it, to go on learning about it is very advantageous. It keeps your machine ticking over.
Would you say that when you take on one of those roles, I mean, so many of them are so epic, that it kind of forces you as an actor to rise to the kind of the level of the character beyond your sort of ordinary day-to-day life?
Oh yes, absolutely. You take Romeo and Juliet, to have such an extension of love, teenage love, and then grief, and then rage, all those things are taken to the extreme.
Yeah.
They live a lifetime in the few short days. So does Hamlet. The things that he goes through are enormous shifts of emotion and experience. Hamlet experiences more in 4 hours than most of us do in a lifetime.
Right.
And so to show us that you actually have seen your father's ghost, that you actually believe that, the best actor I've seen do that was David Tennant in a BBC TV production. He's the only Hamlet I've seen who actually changed after he'd seen his father's ghost. Most Hamlets sort of see the ghost and they carry on with their everyday life. But something changed in him and he was never the same again. That experience had gone so deep. I thought, wow, that's really changed this person's trajectory in life. And that's a good psychological discovery. But do you also examine, how could anyone be so evil? I mean, why do the Macbeths do what they do? And where does it take them? How does it destroy them? Think of their potential for good when they begin the play, and then see them destroy themselves, throughout the play. It's a huge psychological, emotional journey, and it demands everything from the actor. I've done King Lear 3 times now, and I've never got anywhere near where I wanted to get. It's so broad, it's so huge. The degree of rage and grief and suffering that he goes through is absolutely monumental.
Well, some say that Lear is almost impossible to perform.
I've never seen one that's been totally satisfactory. There's the Peter Brook movie with Paul Scofield, which I think succeeds in lots of ways, but I don't think Peter Brook was a great film director.
Right.
He was a great, great stage director.
Yep.
But I never saw any of his films that was totally satisfactory. And I think his legendary production at Stratford with Paul Scofield is not well captured in that movie.
Okay.
And I think Scofield probably came the closest I've seen to getting all of King Lear.
Wow.
Others get bits of it and parts of it, but I believed his journey.
What other roles have you revisited more than once?
I've been very lucky. Well, I've also employed myself a number of times in my own company, so it wasn't just luck.
It's helpful, yeah.
Richard III I did 3 times. I did Prospero 3 times. I did Hamlet twice. I did King Lear 3 times. Macbeth twice. I think I said Macbeth. Yeah, so I've been very, very fortunate having a chance to go back and try again and find something different. And you always do, especially with Hamlet.
What did you discover?
Well, when I did it first, I was 23. And then it was all about rage about his mother and her infidelity and how she betrayed her father and him.
Yes.
As of that adolescent thing, right? I did it again when I was about just on 30. And then it was all about what is life? Why are we here? What's it all about? What can I believe? Is there an afterlife? What is duty about? Looking at it all from all those angles of morality and philosophy, so it's a whole different journey. And I think you can play Hamlet every 10 years and find something that matches your own life's journey, and the questions you're asking yourself will be found in that play.
What about
Ian McKellen's just done it again at 86 years old. So
he just did Hamlet again?
Yeah.
Wow.
So he's still finding stuff at 86. Right?
What about Richard III?
Oh, that was probably my favourite in a way, because it is a lot of fun to play, and he's the consummately evil, but he shares this with the audience, and he jokes with the audience. He tells them what he's going to do. What's my next trick? And he confides in us. And I think that's very seductive, and we stay with him until he murders the princess in the tower. Then I think we go, that's enough now. Time for you to exit. And so he gets the chop. But it's a delightful role. His sense of humour and the way he plays other people, plays them like a fisherman, that's extraordinary, fun to watch.
Are there any roles that you haven't played that you wish you could?
No, the only ones that I didn't do were Cassius and Julius Caesar, but then I played Richard III, which is, not too far away. That and I was never in Midsummer Night's Dream. I directed it, but I was never in that. And there was
Really?
some roles in that I would like to have done. Yeah. So now, look, I've had a very good sample of what there is to offer. I've been quite greedy, and I don't think I should claim any more scalps.
Are there any more that you would love to revisit?
Well, I couldn't act them anymore because I'm just past that age. Of course, if I had the opportunity, I wouldn't actually. I wouldn't take it on. That'd be just silly. I could try and direct some of the plays I've done before, but I'm reached a stage of my life now. I just don't want to take on that. It's too much responsibility, too complicated. I'm much more content doing sort of teaching, recital work, studying, writing, and that's time of life to do that, I think.
You were never particularly interested in film and television. Why was that?
I didn't see myself as a movie star when I was young. I thought you've got to look like Cary Grant or Jimmy Stewart or somebody. I didn't think I had that kind of appeal. I thought I wouldn't work as a movie star. I haven't got that in me. But also I was so hooked on theatre and so determined to be a stage actor and to play Shakespeare particularly that it just took over. And when I wasn't acting, I was thinking about directing or creating a new theatre company or all that just really dominated my life and my ambition.
Yeah.
And I'm not sorry about that. I never really wanted to do movies. I've done a few little tiny bits and pieces, but I think I've been on screen for a total of 14 minutes in my whole career. And that doesn't worry me a bit.
Who's your you've also done a lot of contemporary plays.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have some favourite writers aside from Shakespeare that you love to?
Chekhov. Particularly, yeah, because it's almost diametrically opposed to Shakespeare in terms of presentation. In that Shakespeare is all about text and understanding the text and delivering that text with great clarity.
Yeah.
Chekhov's all about subtext, what characters don't say. They might say, the sky is very grey today, meaning I'm desperately in love and she doesn't want me. Or, so that they're not saying what they mean. You've got to sort of pick out the clues. What are they really saying underneath the text? The subtext is all important. And so it's a different kind of psychology, a different kind of examination. And Chekhov is, just as truthful as Shakespeare in terms of human experience and psychology, wonderfully so. But you can't take him at face value.
Right. Would you say that Shakespeare, is there subtext in Shakespeare, or is everything spoken?
I think it's pretty well all spoken.
Yeah.
And if they do have subtext, they tell it to the audience. It's in an aside.
Right. In your soliloquy.
Yeah. So Iago might be very charming to Othello, then as I reason he says, now what I'm really going to do is this. So he tells us his subtext.
Yes.
You can sometimes find subtext, quite subtle subtext there. Characters being very duplicitous. You can find they're covering up something. But normally I'd say what they say they are is what they are.
What they say they are is what they are.
I think so.
What else do actors need to consider when they're taking on a Shakespearean role? What advice would you have for an actor who is looking to tackle Shakespeare?
Well, first of all, I think the most important thing is to understand what you're saying. You see Shakespeare productions where people sort of fake their way through it. They're not quite sure what that means, or they don't really know where that came from, but they just rattle it off. And you think, hang on, what was that? Can't understand that. Whereas you can understand it if the actor knows what he's saying, then we understand it. But you've got to really be very punctilious about knowing what every single word means and where it comes from and what all those references are, whether it's references to mythology or history or legend. Know exactly what you're talking about and don't just fake it or guess what you're saying or really examine what every single word means. That's the most important thing, so you're fully confident. Then you have to build up your physical and vocal reserves and be match fit for the rehearsal. And then you've got to be free to experiment and throw yourself around and throw your voice around, throw your physical presence around to really get inside that.
Shakespeare famously gave some direction to actors in Hamlet's speech of the players. And so much of the language in many respects actually really helps point actors in a direction that Shakespeare would like them to perform. What can actors learn about acting from doing Shakespeare?
Well, I would say look at that Hamlet speech. For a start, that's the best advice I've ever heard about acting. Speak the speech, I pray you, as I pronounced it to you. And it's Hamlet telling these actors how to perform. You think, well, that's a bit cheeky. They're all professional actors. They're the best actors in the world. And here's this amateur prince telling them how to act. But in fact, it's not just that. Hamlet wants them to perform this play because he's going to unmask his uncle.
Right.
And so he's saying, get it right and make sure it's absolutely perfectly true so that it'll have its effect. And if you misfire or overplay it or underplay it, then it won't have the impact I want it to have. So that's why he's doing it. But on the way, he does give us this acting lesson. And what Shakespeare's basically saying is don't overdo it, don't overact. People roaring and being bombastic, flinging their arms around for no good reasons. No, you've got to be as real as possible.
Yeah.
Like hold the mirror up to nature, be as real and natural as possible. And people have often ignored that. They do sort of throw themselves around and be bombastic and, stylized in some way that is not called for. It can work sometimes if you're doing a sort of farce or someone like Bottom in Midsummer's Dream doesn't hear that advice at all. It goes quite the opposite way. That's really, really bad amateur acting.
Yes.
But if you study that speech of Hamlet's, it's got all the advice in the world, I think.
And do you think that could you maybe explain to our listeners the difference between poetry and prose in Shakespeare and how to approach them both as an actor?
The verse, a verse is different from poetry. For a start, should we say? The verse is just the form of the meter and the rhythm. Poetry is when we start doing imagery and imagination, like when Romeo says, "But see what light through yonder window breaks. It is the east, and Juliet is the sun." That's poetry. Right. He could have said, "It reminds me of the sun coming up at dawn," and Juliet has that. It doesn't say it is the east, and Juliet is the sun. It's fantastic. That conflation, that idea. It's wonderful. So you have to sort out the poetry and say where is it being poetic, where is it being using imagery, and how is he exploiting the sounds, the rhythm, the meter for the sake of saying something amazing, and when is it just the meter? And you'll find that most of Shakespeare's sort of upper class characters speak in verse, not necessarily poetry. It just the verse is there, and it's the old, Attic pentameter, but that of course is based on the heartbeat, ba-bum, 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 ba-bum. That's where it comes from, and it was invented probably by Chaucer in the 14th century. He was on hit on that as the best way to express oneself in poetry. And we do it all the time. We can speak iambic pentameter without trying hard, Antonio says, "In sooth, I know not why I am so sad." And we can say, "I think I'll take the dog out for a walk," or "Why don't you go and do the washing up?" It's natural to us to speak iambic pentameter. It just comes easy. So people speak in iambic pentameter when they're the upper class characters, the noble characters. Some of the lower class characters, like Bottom and quints and so on, to speak in prose, because that's the way ordinary people talk. And but also people speak in verse when they're being honest, because it's coming from the heart. They speak in prose when they're being dishonest. Othello only speaks in verse. Iago only speaks in prose, because it's tricksy. You can't pin it down. You can't find the meter or the rhythm. It's flexible. It's tricky. Whereas the verse is always, passionate and meant to be, you're saying what you're saying. I think that's the main two things. But then Hamlet speaks in verse and prose. He speaks in verse. He speaks in prose. Peregrine and Guildenstern. They're joking about, making dirty jokes, having some fun. They'll talk in prose. They leave, and he says, "Oh, what a rogue and peasant slave!" And he goes straight into verse, because he's been holding it back, and now he just lets it all out. And so it comes out with that strong rhythm and meter that the emotion comes out, because he's being emotional. So when someone goes from prose into verse, all it means is they're letting their feelings be expressed. They're expressing them fully. Whereas in prose, they're just maybe fencing about a bit. So that's putting it very crudely, I'd say, is the main difference, and to pick out which is which.
Could you maybe speak a little bit to the way in which Shakespeare would never sort of come down on one side or another when he was sort of presenting, I guess, an argument in his plays, that Shakespeare doesn't really take sides? I've heard you speak a little bit about that before. Could you maybe speak to that?
Yes, I think the education he had at Stratford Grammar School was a very good education. He was very well educated.
And he was a debater.
A debater. Well, all the teachers came from Oxford, nearby. And so he had some wonderful teachers. And school was hard. You went to school 6 days a week from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. And you mainly studied rhetoric and public speaking and debating. And you had to debate in both Latin and Greek, which is a big core. And you had to take both sides of an argument with equal conviction. And that's what I think he learned about. There are two sides to everything. So you can look at Cassius and you look at Brutus, hear their arguments, and in a sense they're both right or they're both wrong, depending on where you stand. And I think Shakespeare's always doing that. He's always saying there's no real right or wrong, there's nothing good or bad, but thinking makes it so. So it's what the intention is behind what you're saying. And so there are no real, there are very few real villains, say, in Shakespeare. There's always some heroic characters, but even they are flawed. Hamlet is flawed. Coriolanus is flawed.
Yeah.
So is Mark Antony. So they have some human flaw in them. They're not just
cookie cutter.
No, not godlike creations. And similarly, most of the so-called villains have some saving grace. Even Edmund in King Lear repents at the end and tries to save Cordelia's life. Richard III has nightmares and fits of conscience on his last night on earth. It's only Iago who's the only one who's so irredeemable. He says at the end, they say, "Why did you do this?" He said, "I will say nothing," and that's it.
And maybe Aaron in Titus as well.
Yeah, well, Aaron's a bit more. You feel for him and his son.
That's
and,
true.
But there's a compassion there with Aaron.
Yes, there
Even
is.
though he says I'm such a villain, but you have great compassion for the way
he's been
adores
treated
his child.
as well. Yeah, that's
it's
true.
wonderful.
Yeah, that's right.
But Iago's the only one who's so deep dyed and so full of hate and vengeance that there's no saving him.
You've played Shylock. More than once?
Yes, twice, I think. Yes, I think it's only twice.
Was that a favourite role?
I loved playing that role, yes.
What do you love about Shylock?
That he's speaking up for his people. He's telling the Christians how they have mistreated him and other Jews throughout history, how they've been spat on and abused and, kicked around and exploited. And he lets it all out. And it's no wonder that he feels so enraged and vengeful. He said, "That's what you do to us, so why shouldn't we do it back to you?" You wouldn't say he's a totally good man, Shylock, because he does want to kill Antonia, and he is a bit mercenary when it comes to his daughter, but he's not a totally bad man either.
Right.
He's got a great rage, a great sense of injustice, And I think one has to sympathise with that. Again, you can't sit there and either like Shylock or dislike him. You just hear his side of things.
Right. Yeah.
We're not meant to judge him. We just hear his side and we see how the Christians are so hypocritical in their treatment of him. And the play has a lot to do with racism, because in the second scene, Portia rubbishes all the suitors who come, the Frenchman, the Englishman, the Italian, the German. She makes racial jokes about all of them. It's only the Venetians who are worthwhile.
Right.
It's like saying it's only the English who are worthwhile. It's what Shakespeare's really saying through that, He's so sort of nationalistic. But I think there's great compassion for Shylock. And a lot of great Jewish actors have loved playing the role. And I studied it very hard, and I went to synagogue, I went to Jewish families and Jewish people and talked to them about what it was like, and got some very interesting feedback, from them about their point of view.
Wow. I think Harold Bloom talked about how Shakespeare was really the first writer that created characters that had an arc, that they didn't sort of stay the same. They changed over time, and often found themselves in a very uncompromising, harsh world. What do you think about that?
Yes, I think he also said that Shakespeare invented the idea of personality, that before Shakespeare, in drama, characters were either good or bad or silly or wise, or they were like caricatures almost.
He brought a psychological element.
Before him, people said your personality is either shaped by the stars or by the humours in your body, the balance of blood and bile and so on. And Shakespeare said, no, we are not determined by that physical makeup or by the stars. That's all nonsense. We are determined by our own wills and what we want to be. And we can change ourselves and we can remake ourselves. So we're just all a bundle of contradictions. And you think you know somebody, then there is something you think, well, I would never have thought that. There's him doing that. We don't know everybody. Even though people who are close to us can sometimes amaze us with things they do or decisions they make. So he's saying that it's all very flexible, and that the characters in Shakespeare are like that. You just can't pin them down and sort of do a quick psycho study and say that fixes them like a butterfly to the wall, We're all changeable. We're changing all the time. And of course, as you get older, you do change enormously in many ways.
John Barton spoke to the importance of exploring the idea of opposites in Shakespeare's characters, that, as you said, they are contradictions. They're not just one thing. Is that something that you think about when you're either directing or acting in Shakespeare?
Yeah, and Hamlet's a very good example. We have to see him as the hero of the play, and there are many things about him that are admirable, that we sympathise with. But he can also be brutal,
harsh,
the way he treats Ophelia, the way he sends off Rosencrantz and Guildenstern
to their death,
without having any good evidence against them. He has a tough, hard, vindictive side to him, but also balanced with a great sense of morality and
duty.
And the importance of things, priorities, and sorting out where did I come from, how am I here, and how should I live? I think those two questions are what we're always asking ourselves, and Shakespeare's characters are constantly asking themselves those questions. Even Macbeth, he starts out as a very decent and promising career soldier, and then the way he goes through the mistakes and the errors and things that he does that lead to cruelty and self-destruction. But it's not a deliberate path. Things just happen, and he keeps making the wrong decision or gets so far bogged down in the crimes that he's done that there's no way back. So he doesn't start out as a villain, and even by the end, he's self-destructive. He's destroyed everything, and one has to feel a certain empathy, not a sympathy, or you don't have to like him for that, but that's what tragedy is, that someone who's so promising destroys themselves.
I mentioned we've hosted Darren Gilshanen here a number of times, and Darren really credits his 10 years at Bell Shakespeare with teaching him so much about comedy. And he said, he really learnt so much about clowning and from just doing 10 years of back-to-back Bell shows. What do you think Shakespeare teaches us about comedy? What do you like about Shakespeare and comedy?
I think it's so delightful. It's so fresh and free and, lyrical and genuinely funny, but only if actors are not trying to be funny. If people come on and try to be funny, it's distasteful.
It's not funny.
If they're being truthful, then it's funny. But
because the situation's already funny and the language is funny.
And their personalities are so well delineated. I mean, those artisans in Midsummer Stream are so clearly drawn. And people like Feste, people like Andrew Aguecheek, Toby Belch, they're such very, very strong characters in Malvolio. They're wonderful creations. And if you true to them and play them as they are, then the comedy comes out of that, and the conflict between them and the misunderstandings and so on. But I think the comedies are all about hope and restoration and liberty and all the enjoyable things in life.
Love that. Are there any? Do you have a favourite play of Shakespeare's?
I'm often asked that question.
I'm sure.
I would say King Lear is the most profound and the most amazing, and almost. It's almost beyond our imagination. There's just so much in that play that you can dig away and still find more to explore. And the profundity of that vision of Shakespeare's is so huge that it's you never feel you really got all of it. You can by reading it and rereading it, but in performance there's just so much that you can miss out on. And I think that is the one that is the greatest achievement.
What do you think is the most underappreciated of Shakespeare's plays?
Golly, I think Coriolanus is not seen very often, and that's a very strong and very interesting play.
I saw you do that, actually.
Oh, did you? Oh, right.
Wonderful, yeah.
Oh, right. That was with Stephen Burkhoff.
Yeah, well, it must have been, I guess. Have you only done it once?
Yeah.
Then that was the production.
Yeah. I
remember that well.
Look, lots of them, I think. Even plays like Two Gentlemen of Verona or Ready Wives of Windsor. Great comedies. They're not staged very often, and they're not as miraculous as Twelfth Night or As You Like It, but they're still great vehicles, great comic roles in them.
Favorite experience in the theatre? Do you have a favorite experience or a favorite performance?
There have been a few. I really loved directing Darren Gilshanen. We talked about Darren. He taught us about clowning. We didn't teach Darren a thing. He taught us what clowning is all about. It was, I think, directing him in not the Venetian Twins, the
Comedy there is.
The Servant of Two Masters.
Servant of Two Masters.
That production was great fun to do, and marvelously slapstick comedy. And the other one I did earlier on was Venetian Twins, which was also a marvelous play to do, and lots of great comic roles. I love doing those too. I do have a fancy for knockabout comedy and slapstick. I do as part of it, and that's in Shakespeare too, of course. I loved working with Paul Schofield in Macbeth. I played Lennox in that.
Wow. And
I understudied him in The Government Inspector. It was also a great experience.
Wow.
Gosh, there are so many, but those ones just come to mind when you say it.
What advice do you have for actors that are taking on a long run of a show in terms of just maintaining their stamina? What is required?
I've never really done a very long run.
Okay.
So I think I can't really answer that, but I think you've just got to have a lot of self-discipline and tell yourself, this is what I tell myself sometimes. I've done runs that you do it 15, 16, 18, 20 times. You start getting a little bit jaded. I have to tell myself there's a little old lady out there who's come all the way from Queensland, and she spent her last $50 on getting down here and buying a ticket for this play. And she came to see you, and she's out there tonight. And I do it for her.
Gosh, I love that. Do you have a favorite line of Shakespeare's, a favorite piece of text?
Favorite line. You know, there's so many, I can't think of a single one that would sum them all up. Sorry about that.
That's okay. It's fine. I think that's wonderful. Any final pieces of advice that you have for actors that are starting out in this industry, from someone who's had such an extraordinary career and such a wonderfully long career?
Yes, I think the main thing is don't lose heart, even though times are tough. Take on a second, if not career, a second stream of interest, you know, that if you're out of work, you don't feel that life's over, that you're a failure, that, that you've got something else that occupies you. It might be working for a charity, or it might be doing something, it might be just a fantastic hobby that you've got, or looking at some, craft, but something that keeps you occupied. Don't let yourself get into a down spiral. There's no dishonour in being out of work. I mean, most actors are most of the time, so, it's not a negative. But to maintain your interest in life, and I'd say keep reading as widely as you can. Appreciate art galleries and what you can see in pictures and what they're telling you, music that uplifts you. All those things are there for us to get nourishment from.
Fills your well.
Absolutely, yeah. You've got to keep topping yourself up in terms of imagination and passion and enthusiasm. And so if you happen to be out of work and you've got time, well, then dash off to the art gallery, go to a concert, read something wonderful.
Yeah.
There's lots of wonderful stuff to read. You'll never get through it all.
Very well said. John Bell, thank you so much.
My great pleasure, Ben.
It's been an honour.
Thank you.
Thank you.